Hello and welcome to the Common Theory video primer series. We are looking at Wilson Refined Grizzly and the background pairing Far Traveler. Today we are presented with Hive Cryptid on the deck.
First up for any deck, we need to know the commanders. Commanders are Wilson Refined Grizzly and Far Traveler. Wilson Refined Grizzly is a 2-mana 2/2 that says it can't be countered, has Vigilance, Reach, and Trample, and Ward 2, and allows us to have a background. The background here is Far Traveler. It's 3 mana and says commander creatures you own have at the beginning of your end step, exile up to 1 target tapped creature you control, then return to the battlefield under its owner's control. Now, I introduced Wilson first, but little secret about this deck that I try to make not a secret as much as possible, Far Traveler is the real commander of this deck. We're going to spend most of our time dedicated to using this enchantment as an engine. So what does this deck do? It is a true mid-range deck. It establishes its card advantage engine using Far Traveler to constantly have a full grip and develop its own board state while also interacting with its opponents. Has a ton of interaction to accomplish that, and eventually, once it feels it's ready, it wins by suiting up Wilson with powerful auras and protection. Core of this deck is the engine. So let's learn about the engine. It requires 2 pieces outside of the command zone. The first is any creature that draws a card when it enters the battlefield. Here we're going to use Spirited Companion as an example. It's 1 and a white for an enchantment creature that draws a card when it enters the battlefield. The second piece that we need outside of the command zone is any way to get that creature tapped. Often, it'll be with one of the many cards in our deck that are dedicated to that purpose, such as Cerulean Caretaker, which is 1 green for an 0/3 defender that can tap itself and another creature you control to add 1 mana of any color. We have a number of those effects on mana dorks like that. We have a couple in lands, and we have some outliers. But these are not the only ways that we can get things tapped. There are plenty of other ways to get these creatures tapped. It just has to be safe. Combat is the one that comes to mind first. It's really easy to get creatures tapped in combat. For example, Inspiring Overseer has built-in evasion. Or something like Animar Visionary can just tap itself. These pieces don't always have to be on separate cards. Sometimes they are individual cards, such as these. Now, once we have that engine established, what are we doing? How do we actually get to the endpoint? We do that typically through our Aura Tutors. These are creatures that fill a similar role as our draw creatures, but allow us to really sculpt the card advantage we get from them. Heliod's Pilgrim is the best of them. It's 2 and a white for a 1/2 that when it enters the battlefield, you search your library for an aura card. So what sorts of auras can we get with these tutors? Generally, the auras we tutor fall into 3 clean categories. They're either protection, interaction, or a threat. And we're going to get further into those categories here. These targets. So our 3 categories are protection. And here we have our protection pieces. Our threats that all can grow the bear to large sizes based on how many enchantments we have, or in the case of Ancestral Mask, also include our opponent's enchantments. And we have our interaction pieces that all answer a diverse set of problems so we always can find what we need. First category is our protection. We have 3 pieces of this protection, Benevolent Blessing being the first, the Tremana's Blessing, and Word of Lights. They all have flash, and they give the enchanted creature a protection from a color. Importantly, they can be played onto your opponent's cards, and they all have slight differences. For example, Benevolent Blessing allows all of your auras of the chosen type that are already there to stay there, whereas the others do not. And Ward of Lights, if you use it at instant speed, will fall off at end of turn, which can be both a positive and a negative. On your own things, it's obviously we'd rather it stuck around, but it's more forgiving when you play it on your opponent's creatures. The next category that needs more explanation is their interaction pieces. Chains of Custody, Temporal Isolation, and Reprobation. I'm going to go into these a bit more depth. Chains of Custody first is 2 and a white for an aura that gives enchanted creature Ward 2, and when it enters the battlefield, exiles target non-land permanent until Chains of Custody leaves the battlefield. It is the only of the 3 that will actually remove a card from the board, and it is the only one that can answer a non-creature. The downside is it fizzles if Wilson is removed in a response. But upside, it also gives an additional Ward 2, so Wilson can end up with an effective Ward 4. Temporal Isolation is next. It is the only of the 3 that has flash. and it gives enchanted creatures shadow and prevents all damage it would deal. Importantly, it does not say combat damage. It prevents all damage. It can blank pingers. It can blank pingers in response to combo attempts. And it can go on things such as Sir Conrad to block all the damage it would deal. Reprobation is the last of the three. It is also 2 mana, and it says Enchant Creature. Enchanted creature loses all abilities and is a coward creature with base power toughness 0/1. This one can leave commanders stranded on the battlefield, unable to go back to the command zone to regain their abilities. All three of these cover a diverse set of problems. Pretty much any problem you have can be solved by finding one of them. Now, there are a handful of auras that don't fall cleanly into those categories. The first of which is Armadillo Cloak. We want to tutor this when we need longevity in the form of life gain, while also adding pressure to our opponents. Next is Spirit Link. This accomplishes a very similar thing to our Armadillo Cloak in many cases, where it can go on our commander just as a form of consistent life gain, but it can also do a very similar thing to Temporal Isolation when we're not scared of combos, where it could go on an opponent's pinger or Sir Conrad, and now every time they trigger that pinger, we're gaining life while our opponents are losing life. The last of the three that doesn't fall cleanly into a category is Snake Umbra. Snake Umbra says enchanted creature gets +1/+1 and has, whenever this creature deals damage to an opponent, you may draw a card, and it has totem armor. Snake Umbra on its own is a secondary engine for our deck that allows us to draw another additional card every turn. Finally, some general play tips for the deck. We have so much interaction in this deck. Familiarize yourself with it, know what problems it can solve and what it can't. Next, look over the land base. We have a crop rotation in this deck. Understand what you can tutor for with it. And finally, pay attention to your table. This deck can be very vulnerable early on when you're trying to establish your engine. Try to avoid overextending into edicts or sweepers, and be aware of what you need to be scared of from your opponents.
Thank you for watching, and if you want to support the channel, please subscribe and join the Discord in our link below. And become a member over on our Patreon, and let us know what decks you want to see next.